There's slashers and then there's slashers. John Carpenter's Halloween from 1978 is a movie that has stood out even though it was made almost 5 decades ago. The approach in storytelling and John Carpenter's high-level direction makes this movie feel quite modern despite its age, and there has been slasher movies released since then that didn't ever come up to the craft and quality of this timeless slasher that can be rewatched over and over again. Here we truly get introduced to the cliches that have been used in the slasher genre for decades, so seeing them be used in this movie isn't really the same because here they were done for the first time ever. This movie was made for $300,000, mostly by a group of students. The movie's executive producer, Irvin Yablans, set out to make a horror movie that took place on Halloween, which by that point had not been done before. Also connecting it to being babysitter that gets stalked and murdered formed a familiarity because at that time everyone had some kind of experience with babysitters. So it made the horror feel a bit close to comfort, and that made it feel realistic. But Carpenter himself wasn't really after realism. He was after both, actually. He wanted the movie to feel like a documentary, while at the same time having the feeling of an episode of Twilight Zone, where it's unexplained things that happen and you don't necessarily get all the answers you want. In fact, he wasn't planning for a sequel. The original Halloween was planned as a one-off, but it made a lot of money. The original Halloween, as I mentioned before, was made with a $300,000 budget, but it made $70 million worldwide, so it was a big hit. So it was inevitable from the studio's and producer's side that a sequel would be made. But the original Halloween was supposed to be a one-off movie, where it ends with Michael getting away, and I have to say that that ending would be much scarier if the sequel were not made. It's a lot scarier thinking he's still out there somewhere than what we got later in the sequels. And we get him burned, decapitated, and many other different kills he had to suffer through. It takes away from the mystery, and it to a point takes away from the mystery of the first movie. I'm not saying that I hate all the sequels that were made afterwards. I think some of the sequels are quite good, but I would also not hate if Halloween was only just one movie, and that was it. Now I will go over the story of Halloween 1978 in detail, so if you have not seen the movie yet, there will be spoilers. On the night of Halloween 1963, in the suburban Illinois town of Haddonfield, 6-year-old Michael Myers brutally stabs his teenage sister Judith to death with a chef's knife. 15 years later, his psychiatrist Dr. Samuel Loomis drives with nurse Marion Chambers to the sanitarium where Michael is incarcerated to escort him to a court hearing. After Loomis exits their car to unlock the main gate, Michael jumps on the roof and attacks Marion. She runs from the vehicle, allowing Michael to steal the car and drive away. Michael makes his way back to Haddonfield, killing a mechanic and stealing his coveralls before stealing a white mask from a local hardware store. He begins stalking teenager Laurie Strode, whom he saw drop off a key at his long-abandoned childhood home that her father is trying to sell. We don't know why he decides to stalk her other than maybe some kind of fascination with her or how she looks. He just decides within a minute, yeah, this one I'm going to stalk from now on. Laurie notices Michael throughout the day, but her friends Annie Brackett and Linda Van der Klock dismiss her concerns, just making out to be that she is being paranoid in a way. Loomis arrives in Haddonfield and discovers that Michael has stolen Judith's tombstone from the local cemetery. He meets up with the town sheriff, Annie's father Lee Brackett, and they begin to search for Michael. While they investigate the old Myers house, Loomis describes how he realized that Michael is pure evil. And this dialogue for Dr. Loomis is very well written and really describes Michael's state of mind and how he kind of works and thinks. This piece of dialogue is really well delivered by Donald Pleasence. Donald Pleasence, by the way, is the glue that holds this movie together. He is also the most experienced actor in this movie, while the others, aside from Charles Cyphers, are very inexperienced actors or just friends or students of acting or filmmaking in some capacity. That night, Michael follows Annie and Laurie to their babysitting jobs. Laurie watches Tommy Doyle while Annie stays with Lindsay Wallace across the street. Michael spies on Annie and kills the Wallace family dog. Tommy spots Michael from the windows and thinks he is the boogeyman, but Laurie dismisses him. Annie later takes Lindsay to the Doyle house for the night so she can pick up her boyfriend. Michael hides in her car and strangles her before slitting her throat. Linda and her boyfriend Bob arrive at the Wallace house and find it empty. After having sex, Bob goes downstairs to get a bear from the kitchen, where Michael pins him to the wall with a chef's knife. Michael then poses as Bob in a ghost costume and confronts Linda, who teases him to no effect. Annoyed, she calls Laurie to find out what happened to Annie, but Michael strangles her to death with the phone cord while Laurie listens on the other end. Meanwhile, Loomis discovers the stolen car and searches the streets. Worried by the phone call, Laurie goes to the Wallace house and finds her friends' bodies and Judith's tombstone in the upstairs bedroom. She runs to the hallway where Michael slashes her arm, causing her to fall over the banister. Dazed and injured, she manages to escape the house with him in pursuit. She makes it back to the Doyle house but realizes she has lost the keys to the front door. Tommy lets her in and she orders him and Lindsay to hide. Laurie calls for help only to find the phone is dead. Michael sneaks in through the window and attacks her again, but she stabs him in the neck with a knitting needle. Thinking Michael is dead, Laurie staggers upstairs to check on the children, where Michael appears again, while Tommy and Lindsay hide in the bathroom. Laurie hides in the bedroom closet. Laurie stabs Michael in the eye with a coat hanger and then in the chest with his own knife. After she sends Tommy and Lindsay to a neighbor's house to call the police, Michael rises again, seeing the children running from the house. Loomis goes to investigate and sees Michael strangling Laurie. She breaks free by pulling his mask off, revealing his face. Loomis shoots him 6 times, knocking him off the balcony. When Loomis goes to check on the body, he is unsurprised to see that Michael has vanished. He stares off into the distance as Laurie sobs in terror. So that was the story of the original Halloween movie, and when it comes to the script and direction, it's almost nearly perfectly executed. And I say almost because I do have some issues. Minor issues, but they are issues nonetheless. First of all, I think Nancy Kyes as Annie has a rather weak performance. Her performance feels a bit too stale, and the delivery of the dialogue feels a bit like she's just reading lines and not actually performing. No disrespect to Nancy Kyes at all, but here it just feels a bit too stale. The second thing I have issues with is that the dialogue itself can feel a bit too repetitive in some places, like using the word totally in almost every sentence when the girls are talking to each other. The third thing I have issues with is the third act, when Laurie is fighting off Michael and she drops the kitchen knife 2 times, while knowing there is a deranged killer after her. It just doesn't make sense she would drop the only object she has as defense, but those are issues on the other hand that I can look away from because everything else is so effectively executed. So it's just minor things I have issues with, and those are things that make me not consider this movie as a full masterpiece. It is a great movie, but it's not perfect. The direction is perfect and the writing overall is perfect, but there are these small problems the movie has that doesn't make this movie reach masterpiece level for me. It is one of the greatest slasher movies of all time, but it's not a totally perfect movie from a craft perspective. And that can of course be excused that most of the team behind this movie was either students or just mutual friends and had little to no experience making a movie, except from Carpenter and Pleasence and some others. Most of the execution of this movie is great though, and makes this movie one of the best slashers of all time. Carpenter's direction is what makes this movie above the rest. His feeling for what is creepy and when to cut and when not to cut is impeccable. He gets most out of the actors he has in his cast, even the ones that are not that experienced actors. He gets out what he can out of them. The cinematography by Dean Cundey, who was also the cinematographer for movies like Back to the Future, Later, and Jurassic Park, really makes this movie look visually stunning with how it is lit with the blue colors, and the movie feels very much so like fall, even though it's shot in the spring of '78. And it's also shot in California, so the dead leaves were placed there instead of them being there naturally. But staying with Dean Cundey's cinematography, like I mentioned, the blue lighting makes the movie feel sort of clinical and cold, and that I always took like it was supposed to show how cold and clinical Michael Myers is. The camera movement and framing is also great here, with a lot of wide shots showing the suburban surroundings and showing the landscape of the movie. That is a quite small town where you the least would suspect something like this would happen, at least at the time. A lot of smooth camera movements, pans and tracking shots that really adds to the mood of the movie. This was also one of the first movies using the Steadicam shot to make the movements much smoother. This was also one of Jamie Lee Curtis' first roles, if not the very first one of the first roles she had. And Carpenter has explained that the biggest reason him and Deborah Hill were interested in her was because of her very famous parents, Tony Lee Curtis and Janet Leigh, who was in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, playing Marion Crane, and with that being in her horror history with the very famous shower scene in Psycho. So Jamie Lee Curtis had very big ties to her before becoming the Scream Queen herself. Not to say that Jamie Lee only got it because of that. She has a very good performance in the original Halloween, and it's a very classic role and has been very influential to horror and especially the slasher genre. The Final Girl was later shaped after Jamie Lee's work and the character of Laurie Strode. The movie has many iconic lines like "It's Halloween, everyone is entitled to a good scare," or "Death has come to your little town, sheriff." The script is full with very recognizable lines, and that is thanks to the good writing of John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. Yeah, I know I have criticized the writing earlier, but those are just aspects of it that are weaker overall. The script of the original Halloween is still very strong. Speaking of Carpenter, he also scored this movie himself. The movie having a small budget, several roles had to go to the same people. It was not a full crew like it for the most part is today for movies. Carpenter both composed and performed the music, collaborating with Dan Wyman for synthesizer programming and Alan Howard for recording. It is a very simple score, but very effective. In fact, it's one of the most effective and recognizable scores today, at least for horror fans. So having something more sophisticated like an orchestra doesn't mean automatically better. Sometimes you got to keep it simple and the result can still be fantastic. The opening of the movie itself is very unique. You get the score and a pumpkin that is glowing. You immediately get into the feeling of the movie. Then we cut to a POV through a mask on Halloween night. We see a house. We follow this person that is watching the house and seeing people inside. All in POV. He goes inside and kills a young woman. Then gets out and a car drives up and they take off the mask of the unknown individual. And it's a little boy, seemingly named Michael, as the people driving up to the house seem to be the boy's parents and the young woman's parents. This young boy just killed his own sister. If that is not one of the best openings to a horror movie ever, I don't know what is. The movie really makes you feel like anyone can become the boogeyman, and that the boogeyman is coming to get you. I am giving the original Halloween a 8 out of 10. If you liked this video, please like, share and subscribe. Also smash the bell icon so that you don't miss any future videos I make. This has been Boogeyman Cinema. Thank you for watching.
What's the boogeyman?
As a matter of fact, it was.